Blog Talk Radio.
Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach. Always available, too, at carolthecoach.com.
Now, I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell, so you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself?
You get what you need. All right. Yeah, hi there. I am Carol Jurgensen-Sheets, a.k.a. Carol the Coach, and I am so happy to be with you tonight. You know, it's the week after Memorial Day, and I had a show booked. Well, it was a replay, and I don't think it went off very well, so sorry about that. We sure try to take care of you, and I always like to have informative shows even during holidays so that if you're on a normal download, you'll get to hear something that I think was really meaningful. Hey, you know, I know that it can be very tough for somebody to call in the show, and, you know, they're afraid. This is a dark subject, and they're very, very afraid that if they or to get on the internet and talk on the radio, that possibly what could happen is that somebody would absolutely recognize their voice. Well, I don't really believe that would happen, but I certainly can't blame you for worrying. And so I always encourage you to call the show anonymously or to send me an email at carolthecoach@aol.com. So I recently got an email from a very, very thoughtful listener. And, you know, he had a lot of questions about how he should handle his relationship. We'll call him Eric. And Eric said, "Hello, Carol. I've been with a woman for about 6 months, and we are living together. She recently found my SAA book. She then informed me that she was a sex and love addict. My question to you is, what are our chances of making it? Also, when should I reveal to her the true nature of my addiction? She assumes I was only with females, although most of my acting out was with transvestites and males. Thanks for your help." Okay. I say to Eric, you know what? I will talk about this on the show, but this is one of those situations that really is totally dependent on the couple, on how emotionally mature they are, on how close they are. You know, 4 months is not a long time to be committed to one another, and at the same time, it is an investment. And at what point do you share some of your real issues so that that person can decide, hey, do I want to be with this person. You know, I have met many a friend and client that didn't know about their wife or husband's sexual addiction until right before they got married or right after they got married, and they felt so betrayed. Now, this person said that, you know, I said to him, I said, you know, I really will talk with you about the issue, but I do want to be especially sensitive to the fact that I don't know you, I don't know your girlfriend, and I don't know how well you handle tough situations. So I said, well, that's a tough one, Eric. That's a tough one because I really need to talk with you in detail before I give you any advice. Therefore, I don't know that I should be giving you advice without seeing you face to face. Hypothetically, I believe that when you're in a relationship for 6 months or longer, you can share with her information without sharing the details to see if she can tolerate the information. Now, the good news is she's a sex and love addict, so she has some understanding of this condition, and she actually suffers from it herself. So, okay, she's going to not be in the dark as many partners are. I said, you have to be ready for her reaction, and although it could be very positive, it also could be very negative. If you believe you can do it now, my advice would be to talk to a CSAT. Now remember, for my listening audience, a CSAT is a certified sexual addictions therapist. They have expertise with this kind of thing, and they're going to give some good advice. So you find one of those by going to sexhelp.com and putting in your zip code, and then they give you the closest CSAT available to you. Some CSATs actually work via Skype, so if you don't have one in your area, you can still consult with a CSAT. I know I do. I won't do therapy today via Skype. I just feel like there's too many issues, but I certainly will consult with a potential client. I will get them started on some good recovery tools. So I suggested that he do his best to go to a CSAT face-to-face, and certainly my next bit of advice would be consultation via Skype. Because you might need a neutral person to help explain the situation to your partner. And then I say, hey, I know you probably know that this info could be very devastating to the relationship. However, if you feel this is a relationship that is going somewhere, then you have to decide when you believe she can tolerate that information. Have you been checked out for STDs, and are you faithful to her now? Is she open to your honesty? Are you in strong recovery? Again, don't do anything until you talk to a CSAT. Eric writes back and says, oh, yes, I have been checked for STDs and I'm negative. Yes, I'm faithful to her now. All my acting out happened prior to meeting her. And then he says, I would say she's open to my honesty. I'm in the process of trying to find a sponsor to work the steps. She's open to going to couples, SAA, SLA meetings as well. I really appreciate your feedback. Okay, now let's face it. Some of the toughest information that Eric had to share was that he had been interested in transvestites and males. So oftentimes a partner will just assume that the addiction occurred in a heterosexual relationship. So, Eric being very sensitive to this is going to be important. And I got to tell you, if there was one mistake my couples make in dealing with each other, is that they don't get enough support and they don't find enough support for their partner as they're telling them tough situations. And, when that happens, it can be devastating. So that's why anytime there is something called discovery or disclosure, it really needs to be in a situation whereby you go slow, and you don't do this without saying, perhaps to your partner, I do want to tell you about some things, and I want to make sure that you have your sponsor on call, because after we get done talking, you may really want some time to mull this over, to process it, and I want to make sure you have some support. Last thing we want to do is encourage people to disclose information, and then their loved one doesn't have any support. The other thing that is so imperative is that sometimes this kind of discovery and disclosure can get nasty. And if it gets nasty, you have to make sure you are what I call sprayed with Teflon. And that means when you share that information, if it gets nasty and if you get attacked, if the person goes into some sort of rage, that you know that that person asked for the honesty, they're obviously very, very sad, and this is really not about you at this point. Now it's about the other person. Now that's a hard concept to understand. I really work with a conflict model that says if you are owning your issues, and if you are asking yourself, how did I contribute to the problem, and obviously for Eric, it has to do with his past history and the fact that they've been together 4 months and he has not shared any of these details. Again, I'm not encouraging him to do that at this point, but you can imagine if somebody's really invested in you and then they find out that you had a propensity for transvestites, that can be tough information to hear. So if she were to rage, if she were to call him a bastard, if she were to say, I never want to see you again, you're scum, you're disgusting, you're deplorable, whatever the rage is, it's important for Eric to say, my intentions were true. She asked for this information. I wanted to see if she could tolerate the honesty, and now her reaction is about her disappointment, her disapproval, her anger, and I'm not going to take these negative things in. And when a person can do that, again, assessing how did I contribute to the situation and also saying, this was something that she wanted, then Eric's going to be a lot healthier. He's not going to personalize the attack. He's going to very much understand and empathize and have compassion for his partner. And then he'll have to decide, gosh, is this how I want to handle a situation? Do I want to deal with somebody who is so mad at me that she lashes out and attacks me personally? And, unfortunately we say it's diagnostic. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes that's when you decide, can I be with this person or not? Is she healthy enough for me, or is he healthy enough? Being able to handle conflict is important. And I always tell my couples, whether they're addicts or not, conflict is natural, it's necessary, and it's normal. Do with it how we express it is a whole nother ballgame. Now, what I'm very excited about is that we have Eric Gentry on, J. Eric Gentry, and he is actually an expert in trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder and addiction. And he's going to be talking about what is the relationship between trauma and addiction. I read one of his articles as I was preparing to give a workshop on attachment and trauma and addiction. And I was so impressed by the work that he had written about, I contacted him and said, will you come on the show? Because so many of the sex addicts that I work with, so many of you listeners have had trauma in your life. And then in addition to that trauma, you have experienced attachment issues, intimacy issues, and the byproduct is addiction. You've medicated those feelings. And so I thought this would be a great show tonight. So again, I am welcoming J. Eric Gentry to the show, and he's going to educate all of us on what is going on in this field right now and how can people get healthy if they have an attachment issue, if they have trauma, and they have addictions. So do you go by J. Eric or do you go by Eric?
Just Eric.
That's what I thought. Eric, welcome to our show. This is Sex Help with Carol the Coach, and this is the only show on iTunes that talks about sexual addiction. So I was so happy to get to read your article and to see that you are just a master at understanding attachment issues and trauma. I mean, you're a certified trauma expert. Is that not true?
I am indeed. Yes, board certified, and have been doing this for 33 years.
Well, and I got to tell you, it takes a special person to deal in this work because it is so painful to watch people who have these issues deal with developing the coping skills and the pain at the same time and regulating that and modulating that. So we are all ears tonight. Tell us a little bit, first of all, why did you go into this work?
Well, I can rejoin that with almost a rebuttal of what you just said, that it was really painful work for me for a lot of years. But with competency in this field, it is less and less painful and more rejuvenating because I could just get to see so much transformation. And that's the really cool thing about working with trauma survivors is that, you know, it's kind of a high risk, high yield population. They're difficult to work with, but as you develop competency, you get to watch a lot of people's lives transform, and that's for me, that's the opposite of pain.
Well, no kidding, and that's certainly what I tell people about sexual addiction in general. So I get that the more expertise you develop in this situation, then the better you can enable clients to get healthy, and as they get healthier and healthier, the transformation occurs, and then you feel real good about where they were and where they came from and where they're going.
I've been training professionals to treat trauma for about the past 15 years or so, and I start just about every one of my trainings by saying that the really exciting thing about working with trauma is that it's simple. It's not easy. It's going to always be arduous work, but the really cool thing is that when you are able to implement a couple of changes in a client's life, then they start to immediately resolve their trauma and begin to live intentional instead of reactive lives. And that's what you see with people who are traumatized, is that they're reactive. They're coming from a place of instinctual fight or flight, and as you help them to be able to manage that system, and it's not rocket science. It's really, the exciting thing about the field now is that it's moving more and more away from a lot of the cognitive psychobabbly stuff and more into some nuts and bolts of understanding the way that the physiology of trauma is working. And when you can help people to resolve their physiology, then their symptoms abate significantly, and it's just really cool and exciting stuff.
Well, I bet. So let's get into it. What do you believe is the relationship between trauma and addiction?
I've never seen an addict that doesn't have trauma. Now, we have a DSM, Diagnostic and Statistics Manual for professionals in the field that has a criteria for what trauma is, and it's got to be either sexual violence, it has to be actual or threatened death, or serious injury, and that's what the kind of American Psychiatric Association calls trauma. But what a lot of us in the field have broadened our scope to look at that and seeing that any experience of painful learning can produce a traumatic response. So,
okay, so when you say painful learning, what are you referencing for our listeners?
Junior high school.
Ah, okay.
The most popular person among us still went through a gauntlet in junior high school. As we were moving out of primary attachment from family of origin and moving into our relationship with our peers, and that became more important than our family of origin, then, what you saw was, if any of you who are listening, or you, Carol, you just think about those experiences, and you went to junior high school, and just about every day there was some painful relational experience. Somebody slighted you, somebody made fun of you, you didn't have the right clothes, that you didn't fit in this particular clique. And every one of those painful learning, the next time that you encounter a situation that's anywhere similar to that, what happens in that future situation is perceived threat.
Mm-hmm.
So, I love Harville Hendricks' quote that we have not, as a species, we've not learned to raise our children without hurting them yet. Everybody is launched into their adolescence with some attachment trauma. There's no way, even the best parent, there's no way they can be out in front of every attachment need that a child has and be there prepared to soothe that difficulty or be present for them in every single context. There's no parent that can do that. And every one of those little painful learning experiences in the context of our development, in the context of our adolescence, produces, and so this is not capital T trauma, this is lowercase t trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Even with that, as we kind of enter into dating age and start to be in relationships with peers and with people that we're intrigued with and start to have intimate relationships, that what's coming with that is all that painful learning causes us to perceive threat in those relationships. We want them, and they're soothing and comforting, but they're also scary. And so as we engage in relationships, we have the threat response inside of our bodies. That our heart rate beats faster, our muscles tighten, our respiration increases. There's a bunch of chemicals that are released into the bloodstream, and we have that perceived threat relationally. Just about everybody that I've ever worked with has that, and it plays out. And we're concerned about what people think about us. That do we look good enough? Do we have the right car? Do we have the right house? What do these people think about me? And every time that we're in those situations, that we're having we've called it euphemistically stress, the stress response. But what stress is perceived threat.
Oh, absolutely, and that is, as you said, so natural and normal based on different developmental stages and different situations. And so truly, you make this statement about that relationship between trauma and addiction. And not everybody who experiences trauma experiences addiction, but what I did hear you say is that it's been your experience that if you're an addict, you had trauma in your past.
I've worked, I tried to count somewhere between 12 and 15,000 clients throughout my career, and just about every one of them is a trauma survivor. And I have not met... And again,
not big T, but at least little T, and maybe even multiple little T's.
Those are big T's. Most of those clients have all met diagnostic criteria for PTSD, most of them. Let's say 8,000 or 9,000 clients that I've worked with that have big T trauma meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And I cannot remember a one that didn't have some type of addiction. And it may be food, it may be sex, it may be prestige and money, it may be chemicals, drugs, It may be, just what looks like obsessive compulsive disorder, obsessive thinking and compulsive behavior that is patterned. The person goes back to it as a way of trying to soothe themselves, and it starts to have diminishing returns. It worked for them in the beginning, but as they continue to practice this thing, it's what you hear in the rooms is, I used what felt good until it felt bad. And I think that's a really nice window of what addiction is. It worked in the beginning, but by the time that the person, has practiced that for several years or a decade, that they're starting to get consequences back from those ways that they're trying to soothe the perceived threat, which is causing the distress, that their bodies are constantly in a state of hyperarousal. And that hyperarousal...
Because,
go ahead.
You mentioned that post-traumatic stress disorder, and I bet you we've got some listeners out there that wonder if they suffer from post-traumatic stress, and certainly the association is with war veterans and people that have experienced horrific traumas in their life. But can you give us a definition for post-traumatic stress so our listeners will know, does that apply to them?
So that's what I've been doing. I make a distinction, and it's happening more and more in the field. 10 years ago, nobody did it, but more and more in the field, is that there's the distinction between PTS and PTS. PTSD is all the way to meeting all the diagnostic criteria that the American Psychiatric Association holds up, and there are 5 different categories or criteria that you have to meet. You have to have the event, as I talked about before. You have to have intrusive symptoms, which are flashbacks and nightmares. You have to have some type of avoidance of things which remind you of the trauma. You have to have some distorted perceptions about the world or the cause of the trauma, or mood fluctuations, not being able to feel positive about anything, or constant sense of sadness or demoralization. And then the final category is hyperarousal, irritability, can't sleep, anxious, reckless, and self-destructive behavior. Those are all. That's kind of that's to diagnose PTSD. You have to have a certain number of those symptoms. But PTS is somebody that has maybe 6 or 8 of those symptoms, but doesn't meet the whole threshold for criteria. And everybody in the United States has PTS.
Mm-hmm.
We call it euphemistically.
Or they have had it.
We have it. We have it.
Okay.
Yes. Everybody. I mean, we call it
euphemistically. I heard you say we. Okay.
Yes.
So then,
all of us. And I mean, one of the questions that I ask anytime I do a workshop or when I'm sitting with a client is, your life stressful?
Yes.
And yes, you answer that yes. And what we've done as a culture is that we have kind of we've externalized that. We believe that we have stressful lives. We believe we have stressful jobs or stressful relationships. And what's really exciting about the field, the way that we're moving, and I've got a book coming out this fall that addresses this specifically, is that, your life is not stressful. Your job is not stressful. This is sort of semantic, but it ends up being a huge difference, because once you realize that what's really happening is you're going to work and you're perceiving threat all day long. And when you're perceiving threat all day long, your body is responding to that perceived threat as though you are in a life or death situation. And it is increasing the energy level inside of your body. And that energy level, because you're confronting perceived threats all day long, the energy increases and increases and increases, and it produces a state of, I got to get out of this. I can't stand how I feel. This is horrible. And what we've done is that we've externalized that, believing that it's the job that's causing it. And when you believe that you have a stressful job, you're a victim of your job.
Mm-hmm.
When you believe you have a stressful marriage, you're a victim of your marriage. When you believe you have stressful children, you're a victim of your parenting. When you start to shift that and say, now wait a minute, I am perceiving threat when I'm at work. I'm perceiving threat in my marriage. I'm perceiving threat when I drive to work. Now it's internal. Now I can do something about it. Oh, all I got to do is relax the muscles in my body, and I'm not distressed anymore. Cannot have stress, any kind, whether that's traumatic stress or any kind of stress. You cannot have stress inside of a relaxed body. It's physiologically impossible.
Okay, say one more time for our listeners. You can't.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal, isn't it? You cannot have stress inside of a relaxed body.
And so then one would think that relaxation and mindfulness and stress reduction techniques and those kinds of things would help that amygdala, that place where you're in that flight or fright stage, or the freeze stage.
So, I can ask you and all the listeners that are listening to this right now, take 5 seconds and relax all the muscles in your body. Completely release all the tension and all the muscles in your body right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How stressed are you right now?
Well, you know what? That felt good. It wasn't long enough, but it felt good. How stressed was I, comparatively speaking? I am much more relaxed.
And wonder what would happen if you did that 200 times a day. And that's what I teach my clients to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, most of what's taught in psychotherapy is we teach people these techniques that take them 5 or 8 or 10 minutes where they have to take a break. And what I teach my clients to do, take a break from the activities of daily living, that they're at work and you have to kind of wait, and, chant or meditate or do diaphragmatic breathing or whatever else. And what I teach my clients to do is to start to pay attention to their bodies. And when their bodies get tight, to just simply take 2 or 3 seconds to release the tension in their body. When they do that, you immediately get a comfortable body, immediately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you are not stressed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as soon as you take your attention off your body, because you are still perceiving the threat, whatever's there, whatever context that you're in, your autonomic nervous system is going to start cranking the energy level back up. You're going to start tightening the muscles again. Your heart rate's going to climb back up. You're going to have all of that response. So you have to continue this process of monitoring and then regulating by just relaxing the muscles in your body to be able to live, can sustain that comfort, to sustain maximal functioning. Nobody's ever taught us that, though.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What most of us do is we come into a situation that we perceive as, in quotes now, stressful, and we just immediately go instinctual. We brute force our way through those situations. And we lose our skills. We become demoralized. We become in a state of discomfort, dis-ease. And when you spend 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day in that chronic state of tension and activation and energy, you're crying out by the end of the day for some relief. And some of us go to Jack Daniels, and some of us go to Dairy Queen, and some of us go to TJ Maxx, to have some soothing of that chronic state of dis-ease and distress that is all resolvable simply by relaxing the muscles in one's body. And the first time I tell this to somebody, they look at me like, right, you got 2 doctorates and you've spent 30 years and this is the sum total of your wisdom. And I was like, yeah, it really is. It really is.
Yeah. And it clearly empowers the client to start taking care of their mind and their body differently, and that they have everything they need once they learn what it is they need.
Excuse me. all addiction is using an external agent, chemical substance, or an external process to try to regulate that dysregulated system.
Right, and for our listening audience, Eric is referencing there are two types of addictions. One is substance, and then the other is process. If you're an overeater and you're a compulsive eater, or if you have a sex addiction, or if you're a gambler, or if you're those kinds of things are process addictions, and they are, even though they're not the DSM-5 yet, they are clearly compulsive, and they're used to medicate what you would say is the trauma from the past. I mean, because you make such an interesting statement. I mean, you said that attachment trauma may be the true cause of addiction. And I don't know if our listeners know what attachment trauma is.
Well, the best way to describe that is anything that thwarts, prevents, disrupts the infant, toddler, school-age child from being in a loving and reciprocal, attuned relationship with a caregiver. Every single time that happens throughout development, that produces a perceived threat. That is a wound. It's a small one. It's a paper cut, on the soul, on the psyche. But when you have thousands of those, what happens is that the child grows into the adolescent, who grows into the adult, who is now afraid of other people. And at the same time, really hungry for connection because they didn't get solid, good attachment in their development. They're hungry for it when they reach adolescence.
That would make absolute sense. I get that now. And, I encourage my listeners to see a YouTube video called Still Face. And it's about a baby. And I'm sure you've seen it 100 times, Eric. The baby that is being coddled and loved and nurtured by her mother. And then all of a sudden the mother's face just goes blank. And she stops expressing any attachment towards that child. And that little baby, reaches out, begs for mom's attention, starts to scream and screech, starts pounding its little fist, because that is an attachment trauma. All of a sudden the mother is gone, even though she's right there. And it is so scary for a child. That's a paper cut. But if that happens enough, that then becomes attachment trauma, correct?
Right, and so and that's a really nice illustration, Carol. What do you suppose is happening inside of that child's body when she or he?
Yeah, I saw.
Yeah, go ahead.
I saw. I saw fear. I saw the anxiety. I saw the tears. So inside. That baby is exhibiting hormones and releasing all sorts of cortisol that says, this is not right. This is an unhealthy situation for me right now, even though they can't think. They want that relationship. What would you say is happening?
Well, I agree with you 100%. And one time that happens, or even 50 times that something like that happens in a child's life, they're still going to have what Bowlby called, or Winnicott called, good enough attachment, good enough parenting. And they're going to be able to have relationships and be able to be fun. But when you start seeing that that's a pattern, that's a daily thing, that the parents are either addicted or they're vacant, or they're so embroiled in their work that they do not give the child the attunement of where the child has the chance to connect, then what's happening inside that child's body is that they're in a constant state of over-energy. They've got much more energy in their body than does a child that has healthy and solid attachment because they're scared. And what we've done as a field is we've diagnosed.
That totally makes sense to me. Now, what about the brain? You know, you talk about how trauma has an effect on the brain and its brain functioning. Tell us a little bit about what happens there.
Well, there's a lot of stuff, and there's several different places that I would direct you. Anything by Bruce Perry. If you're familiar with Bruce Perry's work, he's the one that's pretty much him and Dan Siegel have done more in the past 10 years to cause, 20 years ago, attachment trauma was this woo-woo kind of area that people didn't really pay much attention to, and it certainly wasn't real trauma. Real trauma was war and rape and crime victims, and then this is milk toasty. And what Bruce Perry's been able to demonstrate is that any disruption in the attachment process in the first 6 months of life, that child has for the rest of their life a dysregulated nervous system, meaning that they're anxious for the rest of their lives, that their default level of anxiety is higher than that of a normal child. Now, what we've learned about brain functioning, and there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into that, but the big deal is that bodies that are overcharged, that have a lot of energy, that people who are stressed out, people who are traumatized, who have that higher level of energy because they're perceiving threat everywhere they go, then what's happening is that the frontal lobe, where all the stuff like impulse control and abstract thinking and judgment and reasoning and the fine motor control and all the kind of human stuff, that's non-essential to survival. So the way that our brains have evolved to work is that if a person is having when the energy in their body, when their sympathetic nervous systems are charging them up because they're in the context of a perceived threat, they temporarily, as long as they're in that perceived threat, they lose their higher order functioning. It diminishes. So they can't think well, they can't act right, they become de-skilled in situations, relational situations, performance situations, those types of places where they are perceiving a threat. A person knows that they can handle this. They've done it 100 times, but now they got an audience in front of them. They find themselves not being able to play their instrument, or not being able to hit the golf ball, or not being able to do the things that they want to do in the way that they do them, and that's a brain problem that they have temporarily. As soon as they're out of the situation where there's the perceived threat, they regain all their functioning. But while they're in that situation where there's a perceived threat and they're charged up, they have temporarily lost the frontal lobe. And what's happening is all the energy is being delivered to the reptilian centers, the brain stem, the basal ganglia, the thalamus, the part of the brain that gets you ready to kill whoever is looking at you in that way, or gets you to try to avoid and get away from that situation. So that's the big deal.
Obviously, they're seeing more and more research that is showing us how the brain functions differently under different experiences of neglect, abuse, addiction, that kind of thing. I started to say stress, but what I really don't want to give credence to, and I think it's something that you have pointed out maybe the first time in 2 years of any professional that I ever talked with, is that really there's no such thing as stress.
There is no such thing as stress.
You have to a situation, correct? Your work can't be stressful. Even your parents' addiction is not necessarily stressful. It's how you deal with it that makes the difference. And let's face it, kids are not taught how to deal with things like that. You know, they don't know about Alateen. They don't know about support groups. They don't know about sponsors. They don't know about anything like that. So they just kind of do the best they can and fly by the seat of their pants. And that creates trauma in the brain. It creates trauma internally.
Absolutely. And,
okay, so now I want to know, do you believe that sex addicts are survivors of sexual abuse?
I think some of them are, and I think that there is probably a predilection towards sexual compulsivity with people that have had sexual wounding. But I don't think it's a prerequisite. I've treated lots of people that have sexual addiction that what the problem is attachment trauma. And they can't, if you, are you familiar with David Snars's work?
Yes, I am.
It's genius work. You know, that what he says that sexual addiction is intimacy intolerance. And that's been, you know, that's what I see. I concur with that 100%, is that intimacy is so scary. It produces so much charge that a person can't sustain it. It's uncomfortable for them to stay in that intimacy. So they find themselves in situations that they can control. You had Patrick Carnes on the show recently, right?
Correct, I sure did.
And you know, he talks about how
he is the master, the king of sexual addiction. You know, he has written more books than anybody.
And you know, maybe the greatest thing that he wrote in his first book, Out of the Shadows, and also in Don't Call It Love, is that, you know, it is not the orgasm that people who are sex addicts are addicted to. It's the ritual. You know, they're not seeking.
100%. And, you know, you think about, that's one of the reasons that the actual act is never as satisfying when they get to the outcome, because it truly is the rituals that is the compulsive behavior that can, you know, mandates that they do it over and over and over again. So we're always looking for ritualization around the sexual addiction so that we can change those habits in addition to, obviously, the behaviors. You know, Patrick says you need a committee to help you with these kinds of things because you know how ingrained this stuff gets.
So let's look at that through the window of the stuff that I've been talking about. For the person that spends 3 hours downloading pornography, or spends 3 hours a night cruising for prostitutes, or, you know, whatever other activity, going to the bars and trying to pick up somebody to be in a relationship with. When they're doing those 2 or 3 hours of rituals, what do they get?
So now if we look at those 3 hours of rituals, what do they get?
What are they getting? What's the payoff? What's the value in that for the person who is engaging in those activities?
Well, the payoff is predictability, familiarity. It's utilizing time. You know, what do you think they get?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right with all of that. But the real thing that is an analgesia. That what they get is 3 hours of being completely unaware of how uncomfortable their bodies are. They are absorbed in that process to such the degree that they don't have to feel the distress that their bodies are in, and that it's now something that they're controlling rather than something that they're suffering from. And so that becomes that kind of charged energy inside of them becomes the reinforcing process that I got to get out of this some way. How do I get out of this? Well, I go absorb myself in this activity of eating unconsciously or you know, looking at pornography or spending money. And during that time, what I've gotten is complete relief from what I'm feeling inside. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there. It's just that the person has dissociated out of their awareness of their bodies.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's why you call it analgesia.
Cool? Yeah.
Because obviously it is that process by which they're totally numb.
You know, food saved my life as a child.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I grew up in a really chaotic and violent home, and you know, I used food as a way of coping with the chronic distress that I was in, and that was a tool that it was a way for me to be able to cope, you know, and it transported me through a lot of really difficult situations. Now, you know, fast forward 20 years ahead. And then, you know, I started having diminishing returns when I'm a senior in high school at 306 pounds. You know, that it wasn't such a useful tool anymore. It worked then, but continuing to stay with it, I had to develop some new tools to not be the victim of my unconscious way of coping with this chronic state of being in pain and afraid and feeling inadequate, feeling hopeless all the time. Food was a way to medicate that. For a lot of people, sex is a way to medicate that.
Absolutely. And so since you shared that you were 306 pounds, at what point did you figure it out and deal with it differently?
Well, I did it like everybody does it. I brute forced. You know, nobody had taught me about surrender yet. So, you know, I had just good enough attachment that I could I finally got disgusted enough with myself, and I suffered enough consequences that I started you know, exercising and diet, and it became really important to me I think my attachment wounding was I wanted to have a girlfriend, and, you know, nobody was looking at me at 306 pounds. And so, you know, I started taking initiative in that way to lose weight. It wasn't until I was probably in my 30s that I started realizing that the reason why 12-step programs work so nicely is that what people try to do to stop addiction is they try to fight their way through not using the substance or the process. And that doesn't work. You know, I will not eat this cake this evening. I will not eat the cake. I will not eat the cake. I will not eat the cake. And, you know, you have the experience of where you just against your will, go to the refrigerator, pull the cake out, and start, you know, snarfing it down at 2 o'clock in the morning. That for people that have the addiction, the disease of addiction, that brute force willfulness will not stop that. Because what's happened is they've become so charged with energy that they have temporarily lost the part of their brain that allows them to hold that resolve, that the distress has overwhelmed them, and they are needing that it's more important to get relief from this feeling that I got inside of me than it is for me to hold on to my integrity.
So then I'm curious, how is the treatment of trauma and addiction similar or different?
Well, you know, the reason why 12 steps work so nicely is, you know, when you look at that first step, the first step is not about fighting this thing anymore. It's about surrendering.
Yeah, surrender for sure.
For sure. And what is surrender? Physiologically, what's a person do with their body when they surrender?
They relax.
They relax. That's right.
Yeah.
They relax, and when they relax, it takes about 10 seconds or 15 seconds of relaxation. Their neocortex reboots. They get back their judgment, back their reasoning, back some comfort inside of their body, and they get another 5 minutes that they don't have to use that substance or that process. And as a person is able to relax their body while they're being bombarded by these perceived threats that they're going through, then they start being able to make it all the way through the day without having to pick up that substance. And going back to what I said 15 minutes ago, you cannot have stress, including post-traumatic stress, inside of a relaxed body. So a person who is relaxing their body does not have post-traumatic stress. You can't have it.
Well, you've convinced me that you can't have it. And you know, the other thing I thought about, another reason that the 12-step program works so well, because obviously steps through 3 are about surrender. And then truly, steps 4 through 12 are about connection and attachment.
They are.
And those, you know, that's the very root cause of addiction and trauma. So it's really reparative in its approach.
It is indeed, and you know, the way that I try to work with people that have histories of sexual abuse and people that have sexual addiction, whether the sexual trauma or sexual addiction, the treatment is the same: is to begin to have relaxed-bodied intimacy with your partner.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing that, when you're able to be intentional and do the thing that you're afraid of with a relaxed body, you are healing the trauma of the past right here in real time. But what most of us do is that we do the things that we're afraid of. We don't do it in a relaxed body. We do the stuff that we're afraid of. We go into our instinctual response, and we hunker down and we grind and we fight our way through those situations. And so what I teach folks to do is to begin to confront those situations in their lives inside of a relaxed body, going to work inside of a relaxed body, driving their car in a relaxed body. And the more that a person with a history of trauma is relaxing their body, the less the trauma is affecting them here in the present. And as a person has, you know, starting out after session 1 with me, they have 1% or less than 1% of their day inside of a relaxed body. And they start growing that up to 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 15% of their day inside of a relaxed body. They start finding they don't need to do self-destructive things to soothe themselves because they're not in near as much distress as they were before they started working with me. Does that make sense? Do you get that?
100%, and it's so simple. You know, we have 3 types of listeners on the show. We have sex addicts, or people that are wondering if they are sex addicts. We have partners of sex addicts, which I maintain have trauma, attachment issues, and all sorts of post-traumatic stress. And then we have clinicians. So for the clinicians who are listening to this show, how can they look at becoming board certified? Because, you know, certainly what you're talking about would be very helpful to implement into our therapy. And like you said, not do the psychobabble, but really get to the meat of what will help them, which happens to be stress reduction techniques or relaxation or mindfulness or whatever. How can they do that?
Well, several different ways. The easiest and simple is I teach. I'm the vice president of the International Association of Trauma Professionals, and we have a certification process, and I do that around the country. It's a 2-day training, and do that. I don't know, probably 70 or 80 times a year, 60 or 70 times a year around the country. I'm doing it next week in Burlington, Vermont, and Albany, New York, and I do that through PESI, PESI.com. You can go to that website and find out what my schedule is, and certainly show up at one of those trainings. And we also offer that as an online training. That is, I've done it as a series of videos that you can participate with the learning community and do that over a 6-week period. And if you want more information on that.
I missed that last part. So you can accomplish that online, and you said it takes how long? 6 months?
It's a 6-week training.
Oh, 6 trainings.
It's 6 weeks, right? It's 6 weeks of.
Well, okay, so now let's go over that again.
Weekly,
you said PESI, and for people that may not know, for clinicians, I'm sure you've seen their brochures, but that's spelled P-E, is it SCI?
SI.
CSI?
PESI, Professional Education Solutions Incorporated, PESI.com. And just search, the name of the course is Trauma Competency. And that 2-day course...
Competency.
Competency, mm-hmm.
Okay. And you have a website, Eric.
I do. I have a couple. The IATP, which is the International Association of Trauma Professionals, for those folks interested in getting training. And what's really exciting is we've put together a certification training for non-clinical professionals, people who are coaches, people who are chaplains, clergy. How to treat trauma in a non-clinical way, because all this stuff that I'm describing to you turns out to be not very clinical. I mean, it can be, but you don't have to be licensed to be able to do it. And all of those trainings and certifications are available on the International Association of Trauma Professionals website, which is traumapro.net.
traumapro.net. Well, I can't thank you enough. You've been very, very helpful. I'm sure that there are people, you've given them a lot of hope, a lot of strength, and in understanding that there are some simplistic things they can do, because as you keep repeating, you can't have stress and relaxation at the same time. You can't have anxiety and relaxation, fear, relaxation. And so understanding that means that they really can empower their lives. And so I just so appreciate you helping out. And, do you know the name of the book that's coming out in the fall?
Yes, it's called Forward Facing Trauma Therapy.
Forward Facing Trauma Therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you let me know when that comes out, and we want to interview you again, okay?
That'd be wonderful. It's a privilege to get to do this.
All right, Eric,
thanks
thanks
for having
again,
me.
and
Blessings
just really
to you
appreciate your expertise.
Yep, thank you.
Uh-huh. Talk to you later.
Okay,
all
bye-bye.
Right, so we were talking with Eric Gentry. Obviously, he's a board-certified trauma expert, and this man knows a lot about attachment trauma, addiction, and how to deal with it. I hope you found the show informative and educational. And, I just so appreciate you listening to the show. This is a hard topic to talk about, so it really matters that you are listening and commenting and sending me emails. Again, if you have a question, it's carolthecoach@aol.com, and you can go to my website, Sex Help with Carol the Coach. And as I say at the end of every show, there'll only be one of you at all times, so fearlessly have the courage to be yourself. We'll catch you next week.